So the UFC in 2024 has officially came to a close. The last event was just a week ago for UFC Fight Night Tampa. And we look forward to 2025, right? I'm sure there will be plenty of incredible moments, incredible cards, but it's time for the first time in the history of my channel to do my very first award show. So we have a number of different awards that we are going to be giving out, but man, we got to reminisce, right? 2024 was, I think, a very outstanding year for the UFC. And you hear Dana say it all the time. How are we going to beat next year? How are we going to do better? And it seems like every single year, the UFC adds a little new sprinkle, a little new wrinkle, whatever you want to say, into the agenda, into the calendar. I'm really excited for what we have ahead. But 2024 was one of my favorite years as a fight fan. So we're going to be giving out a number of awards, right? A lot of these, they actually do give an award for, but I don't always agree with the fighter that they select. So here, as you can see, we're going to be giving out an award for, we got a number of different things, right? Fighter of the year for both men and women. We have performance of the year, streaker of the year. No, not someone taking off their clothes, running across the octagon. Someone who's been on a hot streak, right? Someone that's really found a way to put it together and just put together an incredible year, right? A couple years ago, we saw Kevin Holland do this at middleweight, rack up 5 wins in a year. I mean, that's incredibly impressive. KO of the year, coach of the year, prospect of the year. I mean, you can see all of these different ones on here. So we will go through all of this here together, man. Let's celebrate UFC and MMA here for 2024. Starting with our very first award, going to Male Fighter of the Year. Now, this was a very controversial back and forth, right? Because it was kind of like everyone was pretty much in agreement. It's either Ilia Topuria or it's going to be Alex Pereira. Now, the argument was, okay, Alex Pereira, he's got numerous wins this year, right? He goes out there at UFC 300 against Jamal Hill, absolutely starches on one of the biggest cards in UFC history, saves the day at UFC 303 for International Fight Week when McGregor and Chandler fell apart, steps in, gets another KO over Yuri Prochazka in the rematch, then goes out there at UFC 307 against Khalil Roundtree Jr. and puts on a show, right? That was a very good back and forth strikers affair. And so it's like, okay, well, he's got 3 wins, 3 title defenses. Sounds like it's Alex Pereira. Until Ilia Topuria comes along and is the first guy to KO Max Holloway. And just before that, UFC 298, going out there and KOing Alexander Volkanovski to win the title. So 2 massive wins for that guy. So we got a 3 wins to 2 wins. But at the end of the day, for me, the Male Fighter of the Year, Ilia Topuria. Now, my reasoning is this, guys. Look, if you go out there and you get 2 wins, right, and we got Alex Pereira with 3 title defenses, to me, again, it's not Alex's fault, right? The quality of competition that the UFC's putting in front of him. This is the division that he's in, right? So he's just going to fight the guys that are next that he's going to be given by the UFC. If he would have fought Magomed Ankalaev, maybe I could have felt a little bit differently, but even at that, I don't think that would have changed my mind. Ilia Topuria going out there winning the title and KOing Alexander Volkanovski. Absolutely spectacular. That missile of a right hand that he landed was absolutely nasty. He, was beating up the calf to hinder his movement, boxed him down and was able to get him out of there. Absolutely spectacular. And then you fast forward a few months later, goes out there and gets rid of Max Holloway as the first person to KO Max Holloway. And whatever you do with that, you are clearly a special individual, a special talent. Not only are those 2 wins in title fights, but they are against 2 of not only the featherweight GOATs, 2 probably top 10 fighters of all time that still are with it, right? Volk maybe a little past his prime. Holloway's still somewhere in, I think, his prime years. Absolutely spectacular performances by Ilia Topuria. That's why he is my Male Fighter of the Year. But Alex Pereira, another guy that should have absolutely been in the conversation. Moving on, Female Fighter of the Year. Not a lot of competition here, right? I feel like this is one where a lot of the female champs, they haven't been super active, which normally when it's Fighter of the Year, it's probably going to be, someone that does some crazy things, someone that is defending the title, and that's kind of what determines Fighter of the Year. But to me, wasn't a ton of options to go with, but I thought coming over from another promotion from the PFL, making her debut at UFC 300, Kayla Harrison, going out there, beating Holly Holm the way she did, and then going out there and at UFC 307 and getting another victory, absolutely spectacular. And the thing with Kayla Harrison is obviously when you look at her, I mean, she's an absolute monster, right? She's got outstanding grappling. She has all the makings of being a champion inside of the UFC. And I said for the longest time, at the time of when she was in PFL, she was very hindered, right? Because you couldn't land the nasty elbows on the ground. And, so it was a little bit, I feel like she was being held back. And now that she's into, the UFC and she just, went out there against Ketlin Vieira, you got to see how good and how dominant Kayla Harrison is. She is my female fighter of the year. To come from another promotion, win a fight is impressive to do it right away, but then to win two, one against a big name, but someone who's past their prime in Holly Holm, and then to go out there against Vieira and get one done, absolutely spectacular in my opinion for Kayla Harrison. She is my fighter of the year, for female fighter of the year. Moving on, performance of the year. We saw a lot of great things in 2024, right? This isn't fight of the year or anything like that. I'm talking performance, right? We saw some absolutely outstanding performances all across the boards on basically every single fight card throughout the year. But for me, this really came down to who I think is just one of the most, I call him the most exciting grappler in MMA/UFC history, and that is Khamzat Chimaev, going out there at UFC 308. His back was kind of to the wall here, right? He's going out there against Robert Whittaker. It was supposed to happen in June. He had to pull out of the fight. And there's a lot of questions, right? Well, what's going to happen with Khamzat? Is this it, right? He's going in there against one of the best middleweights of all time, a guy still in his prime, 2-fight win streak, coming off of a KO over Ikram Aliskerov. Very, very impressive stuff by Robert Whittaker, and he put a nice beating on Paulo Costa, right? So there was a title shot in the wing for Robert Whittaker if he could get a win over Chimaev. Khamzat goes out there and absolutely destroys Robert Whittaker in the very first round. It was one of the most impressive performances that we've seen in UFC history, in my opinion, right? It wasn't a title fight, I understand that, but the magnitude of this fight, going in there against one of the best middleweights who's still very much in his prime in Robert Whittaker and absolutely steamrolling him and getting a finish like that, absolutely spectacular. Khamzat Chimaev's victory over Robert Whittaker, that was my performance of the year. Moving on. Streaker of the year. Like I said, this isn't someone who dropped their drawers, man, and is running across the octagon going, woo, when you see those streakers out there at like football games and stuff. That's not what the streaker is. Streaker of the year, this is someone that put it together. This is someone that made some adjustments in their fighting style. They made some adjustments in their camp, and they just were like, you know what? It's time to get active. It's time to look. I can fight every now and then. That's great, but no, we're going to switch divisions here, and we are going to put our foot on the gas, and we are going to rattle off a bunch of wins. That's what Streaker is. The award here. Who rattled off a bunch of wins and really showed out in 2024? And really, I don't think there's any argument here. That award goes to Joaquin Buckley, Numanza. Coming off of the final event of the year, right? Goes out there and absolutely lands some nasty shots against Colby Covington, is able to get the TKO stoppage. Yes, there was a cut, but it was still a spectacular performance by Joaquin Buckley. And you just go through the performances ever since, in 2024, this guy drops down to welterweight, right? Goes out there, a really impressive performance against a solid opponent in Sultan Ruzaboev in St. Louis, right? Goes out there, takes him down, shows his striking, goes in there, absolutely decimates Vicente Luque. Looked like Vicente Luque gave up in there, and everyone's like, oh, Luque's done. He doesn't have it anymore. Maybe it's just Joaquin Buckley's that good, right? Then goes out there against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson at UFC 307. Absolutely spectacular performance, right? You're in there with Wonderboy Thompson. That's a tricky puzzle to solve. Not many guys have been able to solve it in terms of the striking, right? Guys have been able to take him down, control him with the grappling. We saw Buckley take him down. Didn't have a ton of success, and it was like, okay, oh crap, I can't rely on the grappling here. What am I going to do? He said, F it. In the third round, Mike Tyson style, hands up, bob and weave forward, lunges in, throws a nasty hook, and is able to KO Wonderboy Thompson. And then his most recent outing against Colby Covington, that is 4 wins in a row. The guy's been on an absolute tear since coming down to welterweight. Joaquin Buckley is the streaker of the year. Now, streaker of the year, that'd probably go to Derek Lewis if we were grading it off of who was dropping their drawers. But look, Joaquin Buckley, no denying the dude is an absolute savage and a real problem inside of the welterweight division. Moving on. KO of the year. Knockout of the year. Now, the one that everyone's going to talk about is Max Holloway, right, against Justin Gaethje, UFC 300. And to me, there's no question that that is an outstanding knockout. Absolutely spectacular. But if they don't have that moment where Max Holloway is just the legend that he is and points down at the canvas and they just slug for the last 10 seconds, that KO doesn't happen. And I know it's like hindsight's 2020 or what if, but we got. I'm factoring that in, right? Because so if they never just if Max wasn't who Max is, that probably doesn't happen. He just kind of coasts at the end there for the last 10 seconds. We find, and just coast to a very easy victory over Gaethje. It was a spectacular performance by Max Holloway. But I'm going off of a legit KO. That was a legit KO, but something that just happened where it's not like guys are pointing down at the ground and they're throwing down for the last 10 seconds on one of the biggest cards in UFC history. I'm talking about a guy who went out there and KO'd somebody that's never been KO'd before, and that is Ilia Topuria, landing a devastating left hook on Max Holloway. Now, he said, man, screw Alex Pereira. He's not the only guy that can throw a left hook. Watch this left hook. Perfect technique by Ilia Topuria. Drops Max Holloway, follows up with some ground and pound. This was an unbelievable KO to me because we've never seen Max KO'd. We haven't really seen him in too much trouble in terms of the striking. And for Ilia to go out there and KO a guy, like I keep saying, who has never been KO'd, absolutely spectacular to me. That is the knockout of the year, is Topuria against Max Holloway. The way he set it up, the way he was just very patient, methodical moving forward, I thought it was absolutely spectacular. Moving on, Coach of the Year. So this is, I think, our only non-fighter award. Now, normally, a lot of the coaches that win these awards, I feel like, are people that a lot of people know, right? They coach multiple fighters in the UFC, and they kind of, you see them all the time, and they kind of like become a personality, right, on social media, like Eric Nixick, Trevor Whitman. Like, these guys are, you know who they are. You see them, they coach numerous fighters. Well, this guy, he does coach a few fighters, but really it's the game planning and what we've seen in the evolutions in his fighter that is the middleweight champion of the world in Dricus du Plessis, head coach Mornay Fisser. Now, I believe that Mornay is one of the most underrated coaches in all of MMA. From what we've seen from DDP in 2024, has been absolutely spectacular. Goes out there against Sean Strickland, has a little bit of a rough first round, right? Sean Strickland looked spectacular in that fight. I feel like a lot of people missed that. Even though DDP won, I thought that was one of the better versions of Strickland that we've seen. He was getting the jab going. DDP was kind of accepting being on the back foot. Mornay Fisser says, listen, man, we got to be more aggressive. You can't let them bully you around. Time to put your foot on the gas, mix up the combination, start moving forward, mix into grappling so that way we can separate ourselves from this guy. So they did exactly that. Then they come out there at UFC 305 against Israel Adesanya to what I thought was one of the best versions of Izzy that we have ever seen. He looked dangerous. He looked fast. He looked mean. His boxing was outstanding. And Drake has said, I don't care, right? He took some nasty shots to the body, goes out there, landed some good shots of his own on Izzy, and was ultimately able to take him down and get a submission, which we have basically never seen that against Israel Adesanya. So when you're mixing things up very well and you're listening to your coach and you're coming in with these game plans that are very well formulated in how you're going to approach these high-level fighters, yes, the fighter has to go out there and execute. Yes, the fighter is the one in there doing it, but there is some sort of mastermind and some sort of like wizard behind the scenes turning the dials, some sort of Wizard of Oz. I believe that that's Mornay Fisser. He is my Coach of the Year for 2024. Moving on, Prospect of the Year. This was kind of a hard one, right? Because we've seen a lot of guys burst onto the scene, right? We've seen a lot of fighters. They come in, they come off the Contender Series now is really where we're seeing a lot of guys that seem like to be the next best thing. They come in, they put all these spectacular performances, and they kind of have everyone going ooh and ah. And then we get a guy like Mauricio Rufy who comes off the Contender Series, and they kind of have a hard time getting him some fights, right? So he goes out there and shows some things. But what I'm looking for is a prospect that at the end of 2024 here, right? In the beginning of the year, we were like, okay, we kind of know who you are, to where it's like, now we all really know who you are. And that is because you were active, you put on some spectacular performances, and we saw some elevation in terms of the competition that you faced. That would be Carlos Prates out of Fighting Nerds. Listen, out of the Fighting Nerds camp, listen. There's no question that Carlos Prates inside of the 170-pound division is one of the guys that we all have our eye on. He has a spectacular fighting style, outstanding Muay Thai, very, very good kicks, very good boxing, very good knees. I mean, the knees to the body, the knee KO over Radke, it was absolutely spectacular to go in there and KO the Leech like he did. Who KOs the Leech like that? So that was absolutely spectacular. And then to go in there in a fight night main event, 5 rounds, the big test. I know Neil Magny is kind of more of a gatekeeper journeyman at this point, but he's kind of a durable guy, right? He's a guy that can take a beating and survive, for 15 to 25 minutes, however long the fight is going to be. Goes in there against Carlos Prates, and the power of Carlos is absolutely different. I've been saying for the longest time now, this guy has the it factor. He is, you tune in, right? I mean, this guy's smoking cigs, for God's sakes, outside of the thing and walking in, man. Like, he's smoking. How are you going to tell the young kids at the gym to stop smoking? Because look what this guy's doing. This guy's absolutely spectacular. He's dangerous. He's got that thing that makes you want to watch. He's got the look. He's got the swag, and he's got the fighting style that draws people in. And that Fighting Nerds camp, I keep saying it, they must have a lab out there where they're just like adding potions to these guys. A little jiu-jitsu, a little striking, a little this, a little that. These guys are all different, but yet spectacular. Carlos Prates is one of them. He is my 2024 prospect of the year. Moving on to fight of the year. Boy, did we have some good fights in 2024. We had some outstanding main event headliners. We had some great prelim fights. We had some, just random fights on the main card or throughout each card. We had a lot of good scraps this year. But there is one that every day I seem to have this fight pop into my head to where I'm like, let me watch some quick highlights of this thing, man. And it was a fight that actually was very unexpected to me that was going to turn out to be fight of the year. I mean, if you would have asked me before the year, you told me every single fight that was going to go down in 2024 ahead of time, there's no way that this would have been on my radar. It just wouldn't have been. And that is at the Sphere UFC 306, Daniel Zellhuber versus Esteban Ribovic. This was one of my favorite fights of all time, not just of the year, but I mean, for this sake, it's for the year, but of all time. I mean, you had two prospects on the rise, right? Daniel Zellhuber, he's got the striking, he's fun to watch, he's got good boxing, good coaches behind him. Goes in there against Esteban Ribovic, who is an absolute beast. Going in there, the way he finished Terrence McKinney, just a dangerous guy on the rise. And whenever we see two prospects collide, especially in a big moment like the Sphere at UFC 306 with all the different things going on, this fight absolutely delivered. It stole the show, it stole the night, and for me, it stole the year in terms of fight of the year. Both guys got hurt, both guys landed good shots, the pace, it was relentless. It was the best 15 minutes of the year. This was my fight of the year, was Esteban Ribovic versus Daniel Zellhuber. Moving on to submission of the year. We had some good submissions, right? Khamzat Chimaev goes out there and beats Robert Whittaker. I already gave him an award, and that was a spectacular submission. We saw Diego Lopez go in there. We've seen some really, really good submissions. But for me, what I factored into this is, okay, so you got a submission, but I was looking for, well, how did you set this submission up? It wasn't like, I'm just going to throw up a Hail Mary, or there was, and with this pick here, it was a very high fight IQ moment to where we were seeing a very good back and forth dogfight, and that was Islam Makhachev late in the fight, finding a way to grab the leg and get Dustin Poirier down and find a submission. This was absolutely spectacular. Dustin Poirier looked dangerous. He looked sharp. All of the stuff coming into this, we were like, maybe this is DP's last fight. It felt like you were going to have to go to another level to beat Dustin this night. And Islam Makhachev, in what was a very good back and forth, even though he was winning the fight, found a way to get a finish over Dustin Poirier late in the fight. This was an absolutely spectacular finish by Islam. This was my submission of the year for 2024. Moving on to title fight performance of the year. We had some good performances in title fights, right? We saw champions put on some good title defenses. We saw some challengers come in and put on some good performances, right? We had Sean Strickland against Izzy Adesanya, or that was last year. Never mind. For 2024, dog, you know what I'm saying? But you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of what I'm looking for, is something that was different. Something that was like, okay, wow, we really got to see something from somebody. Like what Sean went in there, everybody counted him out against Israel Adesanya, and he goes in there and he's able to find a way to just get in his face, make it, an uncomfortable fight for Izzy and get a victory. This was a fight where I wouldn't say too many people counted him out, but people were not exactly sure if he was going to be able to go in there and do it to a pretty technical striker, a guy that has a very well-rounded skill set in Leon Edwards. And my title fight performance of the year was Belal Muhammad at UFC 304 against Leon Edwards, right? This was, Belal kind of had to, paid in full, just like what Dustin Poirier likes to say. Belal Muhammad did not have an easy route to the title. He had to keep winning, keep knocking down contenders, moving forward ahead in the rankings. He beat numerous ranked guys to put himself in position for another crack at Leon Edwards, right? The first time around, there was the nasty eye poke from Leon, so we didn't really get any, finalization when it came to that. So they run it back. This was a dominant performance from start to finish by Belal. The way he mixed the boxing, the striking, the wrestling, the pace, the pressure. This was a vintage performance by Belal. And he had a great performance against Sean Brady, and he was able to get him out of there. But this, to me, was probably the best performance of his career. I know you could say, because he finished Sean Brady, but to go out there and dominate a guy who's an absolute technician in Leon Edwards, who just seemed, absolutely spectacular coming in. This was a huge win for Belal Muhammad to win the title. It was dominant outside of getting sliced up by an elbow late in the fight. He dominated. The way he mixed it all together, this was a spectacular performance from Belal Muhammad. Now, this award, my Striking Battle of the Year. So Striking Battle of the Year, you could say, well, what's the difference between Fight of the Year and this? This is one where we see two guys where we know coming into this fight, this is Striker's Delight. The UFC booked this because they're like, okay, look, we got a fun guy here. We got a fun guy there. This isn't maybe the fight that's supposed to be happening, but we know when we put these two in the octagon together, it's going to be fireworks. It's basically going to be a kickboxing fight inside of the octagon. That's exactly what we saw with Alex Pereira defending the title against Khalil Roundtree Jr. This was an absolutely spectacular fight back and forth. We saw both guys hurt each other. Roundtree did much better than a lot of people anticipated, but at the end of the day, we saw just how good and just how dangerous Alex is the later in the fight. When he started to get into that flow state, started to land some nasty shots. Roundtree's stock went up from this, because he was in there landing some good shots, taking some punishment from Pereira. This was an outstanding back and forth Striker's Delight matchup. We all knew why the UFC booked this, right? It was supposed to be Magomed Ankalaev. They didn't go that route. When they threw Roundtree in there, guy that was on, I think he was on a 5-fight win streak. He's got that fun Muay Thai style. They're like, look, we're going to throw him in there with Poatan. We'll have a good show in Utah. We know this will be a Striker's Delight. This was my favorite striking battle of the year, was between Poatan and Roundtree. Moving on to Grappler Battle of the Year. So this is another award that I got here. There were some good grappling matches this year, but I feel like we all could be in agreement for this one. This was a fight that, it's not often that in the UFC we see two grapplers go in there and they find a way to just such high-level stuff. Almost like watching a flow grappling type of match, to where it's got great wrestling, submission attempts at times, or just changing position, great scrambles. That's what we saw with Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling. To me, this was the unsung hero fight on the card for UFC for this event. I mean, this was absolutely spectacular, right? I thought that this should have absolutely have been on the main card. I mean, I loved every single thing about this fight. I mean, when you talk about Movsar Evloev, he's got really good grappling, right? And coming into it, it was, well, how's Aljo going to deal with the grappling? Aljo actually kind of out-wrestled him a lot, right? I mean, he was doing Aljamain Sterling was doing a spectacular job ever since coming up to 145, dominated Calvin Kattar at UFC 300. And I'm like, this guy's going to be a problem because he still has that awkward style, still has a submission threat. He's still big. He's fast. He seems a little bit more comfortable to me at 145 than 35, right? Not draining himself as much with the weight cut. Goes in there and basically out-grapples Movsar, right? I mean, that's incredibly impressive to do because Movsar is absolutely spectacular. But what hurt Aljo in this fight was the fact that Movsar, when he was looking for transitions, when he was controlling the grappling, he was landing some good shots in there to where Aljo was just basically only grappling and was not throwing enough strikes. Movsar won this fight. In my opinion, people were saying robbery and whatever. I definitely thought Movsar won the fight. He landed more shots. This was an outstanding grappler's delight. It's very rare that we see something like this, a fun back and forth grappler's affair. This was a great one. This was the best one of the year and one of the best of all time, in all honesty. Moving on to Joke of the Year. So some fun ones now. Joke of the Year. Now, what do I mean by Joke of the Year? I mean someone who's just basically a clown. Someone who's doing a bunch of dumb things, riling up people in the MMA community. Someone that I just look at them and I'm like, I can't stand them, man. They're just a joke. And that easily goes to Merab Dvalishvili, right? This guy goes out there, finally gets an opportunity to fight for the title, which I've been saying, look, he absolutely has earned, the opportunity to go in there against against Sean O'Malley, and puts on a spectacular performance, right? Goes out there and just, he controlled the fight, moved in and out of range really well, avoided the big shots of Sean O'Malley. This was a great job by Merab. Leading up to the fight, he's got stitches or something going on. He's posting pictures online. He's creating these stupid cringe skits that are super annoying online. Why? Not many people want to tune in to watch Merab's fighting style. So what's he do? He posts these dumb skits, gets people talking. Hey, it works. So that's kind of why I think he's a little bit of a joke, but also he didn't want to fight Umar Nurmagomedov, right? I feel like we all know that at this point. I made a video on my channel talking about it. The UFC, it sounds like they sat him down and were like, you take this fight or else. He was glazing Petr Yan. He was glazing Sean O'Malley because he wanted a rematch with a guy that stylistically was someone that was a better style matchup for Merab, where he could go in there and win probably another dominant decision. And again, O'Malley, Yan, two of the more interesting fighters to watch stylistically in the division. Merab knows that. Merab's not really a draw, right? But if he can find an opponent who's a draw, that definitely helps. Now, Umar, he's a draw, right? People want to tune in and watch him fight. He is the hardest stylistic matchup for Merab Dvalishvili. I've been saying that, for basically the whole time. Merab blocked me on social media, and I don't comment on any of his stuff. So all I said was I had a post that ended up blowing up and doing really well. I said, look, he was glazing O'Malley. He was glazing Yan because he wanted a rematch with one of them to cherry pick a title fight, just like O'Malley did in all fairness when he, fought Chito Vera at UFC 299. So I get it there, but he knows Umar's his toughest challenge. So that's, to me, the jokester of the year is Merab Dvalishvili. Moving on. The duck of the year. Whack, whack. So it could have went to Merab, right? But he signed on the dotted line at the end of the day, whether he was forced or not. He is going to be fighting Umar. The duck of the year, we all know who this is. This is the guy that went in there and fought old man Stipe, a guy who was 40-some years of age, a guy who's, up at the fire department, didn't seem like he really wanted to be in there, right? He was a guy that was after the fight. He's like, man, I'm so glad this is over, basically, right? I can't remember word for word what he said, but he was just done, right? It seemed like he just kind of showed up for a paycheck. This is John Jones. He should have been fighting Tom Aspinall. We all know it. The Dana White says this fight's going to happen. I'm not sure it does. I hope it does. He should have fought Aspinall. Aspinall was in there as the interim champion, defended an interim title against Curtis Blades. Like when John came back, he should have fought the guy that was an interim champ in his division. Duck of the year. You hear John Jones out there, whether it's a marketing tactic or whatever's going on, from what we're seeing right now, this guy doesn't seem like he wants too much to do with Tom Aspinall. Didn't even want to do interviews, didn't want to talk about him. So again, is it a marketing tactic? Is it some mind games from John Jones? Maybe. I just think that he knows Tom Aspinall is the greatest threat to his undefeated reign in the UFC. I believe that John Jones is whack, whack, duck of the year. Moving on to card of the year, right? And I feel like this one, we saw some good cards this year, right? From top to bottom, card of the year, it's not just one fight. It's how many fights delivered in the event. UFC 300 was spectacular, right? That was definitely one of my favorite cards. But to me, look, a lot of people are going to say UFC 300. I actually think that there was a card that was better. You can agree to disagree. I don't know that everyone's going to agree with this. I thought UFC 308 was the best card of the year. This card, to me, was one of the most enjoyable moments, right? Ilia Topuria goes out there, KOs Max Holloway. Khamzat Chimaev, the goosebumps of him going in there against Whitaker. Like, is he going to get, what happens if he gets finished by Whitaker? Is this the end for Chimaev? I mean, what happens? Goes in there, dominates Whitaker. Ankalaev goes out there, puts on a nice performance against Rakic. Ige and Murphy going back and forth. Shara Bullet going in there, spectacular spinning back fist KO. Ibo Aslan, nasty KO finish. Jeff Neal gets the finish over Rafael dos Anjos, even though RDA did get injured. Ron Betsky versus Orlovai, one of the best fights of the year. That could be a candidate for fight of the year. Abus Magomedov going in there getting a crazy finish. Kennedy Nzechukwu going out there with an impressive performance over Chris Barnett. Basharat going in there against Hugo. That was a good competitive back and forth matchup there. And Nurdayev goes in there against Silva. That was a good matchup. And then the robbery on the first fight of the night. So a little bit of controversy to me factors in to the cards a little bit. But to me, this was a card. Not only did we have one of the fight of the year candidates on there, in my opinion, Rob Betsky versus Orlovai, but we had some other spectacular finishes and performances on this card. This, to me, was my favorite card of the year. And last but not least, the fraud of the year. Someone who got exposed. Someone who everyone was so high on, but it just came crashing down for them this year. And, you know, many are going to say Rebellis Despain. And I agree. He definitely got exposed. He's a fraud of the year. But I think there's a bigger fraud. Because I think that there's a guy that, you know, Rebellis Despain, it was kind of like, okay, he has no grappling, so if people can just take advantage of the grappling, it's going to be a problem. There's somebody else that has it worse. And in my opinion, that is Vitor Petrino. Goes out there against Anthony Smith, who he should have dusted. An old, washed up, on paper Anthony Smith. And goes out there and gets embarrassed in Brazil and submitted by Anthony Smith. And then goes out there on the final card of the year, gets absolutely starched by Dustin Jacoby. Now, I know Dustin Jacoby's a good striker, right? He's a glory kickboxer. He's got good striking. He's not, when is he, you know, one-shot starching anybody? Never. Goes out there, he's the one that usually doesn't have the power advantage against these guys. He's normally the technical guy, the technician out there picking and poking. He goes out there and gets absolutely flatlined by Dustin Jacoby. It looked a lot like how Usman KO'd Masvidal, and that's exactly what it looked like. A right hand from hell that absolutely slept Vitor Petrino. That was a devastating knockout. This was a fraud check of the year. Vitor Petrino, big yoked up guy, goes up there, you know, screams and shows, oh, I'm this big old dude, look, you know, and goes out there and gets absolutely starched by Dustin Jacoby, and then gets embarrassed in Brazil and submitted by an old washed up Anthony Smith. That was embarrassing to me. Those two moments back to back gets finished. That's a fraud check of the year, in my opinion. But if you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a like, comment your thoughts below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss an upload. I would appreciate it. Here's to 2025, man.